Welcome, welcome. So, it is award season. It's award season, and I've been away. I know I've been away, but I'm back. I have, been going through all the looks, the events, the seasons of everything that's been going on. Today, I think today is the day after Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance. So a lot is happening within the world, and I just felt like it was time for me to come back and, be present. So, in all of the, ruckus that has been just this year, an award season, we cannot. And while I felt like if there was a 2 cents that I wanted to put in, it was about the Golden Globes and just how I felt it was moving and how I felt the reaction was and what my reaction to that event was. Because we are now in the world where lots of things can be critiqued, but what is very sensitive to critique is culture. When we think about people's culture, when we think about the sentiment and the structure, the purpose, the religion, we consider what critique does to that and the relationship that is between both these two like worlds. And it's very difficult because critique is quite numerical, quite objective. Even if you try your best to be subjective about something, there's objective things that are necessary to deem something of a status, because status comes with that level of objectivity and exclusion or inclusion of whatever you decide um qualifies a thing as good, great, diamond, platinum. We see how it correlates with the R&B jazz world, because we've seen what critique has really done. And so in the sense of the film world right now, I think we're watching how people are going about critiquing culture. And I felt that in watching Timothy Chalamet win for his performance in Marty Supreme, which I have not watched. So I will not base any of my judgment or feeling on that. But what I can say is a strong part of when we talk about the award he won, we have to talk about people do really like the movie, and there's a bit of spectacle that people are really drawn to, and I understand that. And so I ask myself, is there the difference that spectacle awards that maybe culture isn't, it just doesn't qualify, because culture is very, either you understand it or you don't. But if something is pretty and it's big and it's wow, a lot of people can get it. But beyond this Golden Globe win, I also thought about it because I watched The Northman. I was doing a rewatch of The Northman, maybe a few days after the Golden Globe Awards, and I realized that The Northman was a movie that was so like deeply rich in the storytelling, the history, the reality, the mythology that it was trying to talk about. And it did not gain the critique that I think it was really trying to find. It didn't get itself the awards, the Golden Globes, the Oscars, the set design, costume design. They didn't get all of that. And it's such a contrast when we think of it in comparison to Sinners, where 16 nominations and, an objective stance in culture and the pop culture, that made me wonder what is the difference here. And sure, we understand there's, difference of the people and the lands and the spaces, the languages. But what happens when we look at culture that can be accepted and taken in, and culture that's just not enough, especially to critique? And I think it's very important that we also all start with the time and place of these two movies. I think when we enter Ryan Coogler's world, we see a living world, something where you can you can accept and acknowledge that there was a space and time where slaves did fill a field, and there was cotton fields. There was that level of, segregation, oppression, and poverty, and just the lack of is something that you can take in and you sit with as a living world. And the same can be said for the church where Sammy is raised. The stark white, simplicity of it is more than just, pretty set design. You can understand that. And when you think about it, you go, there wasn't much to build with. So what comes out is very stark and simple, but what it represents very is very present from now and from then. So when we find ourselves in this space, in this area, while we're watching this movie, you feel the weight of its present day consequences. You feel the weight of what it feels like now to sit or in a cinema at your TV and watch what was reality. And this creates like a marker of history that you have to accept with a heavy heart. And if you cannot accept it with a heavy heart, what it comes off as would probably be just a trauma and not history. And I think when we think about history, we have to acknowledge that what it creates is a moment where reality stands still, whether it's the pictures, the videos, all of it. And in this movie, there's these moments where you can say reality stands still. And in the Northman, it's just as prominent. And we see this more when Amleth is older. We no longer see him as the prince or the king or the king's son. Instead, we are introduced to him in his grown up self as living with berserker like Vikings. And we also, the first scene where we are truly introduced is when we see them by the river in this boat, and all these men are rowing this boat with this intense unity. It almost feels chance like how something would begin to breathe and, collect momentum. All of them are in sync, and you watch it not as spectacle. It feels quite daunting. You look at all these men and you ask, where are they going? And if it feels so real to question that, where are they going? You also feel the fear of, where do they dock? And when we see that, when we see the brutality that is the Viking 1895 BC, not this great, pride, but instead a very savage and ravenous society and state of living and cultural living. We we are taken in to what it would truly mean when they say to fight and die to join Valhalla. You watch the brutality of what they have decided war is and how much bloodshed they can bear for the greatness of this afterlife and the earnings of this afterlife due to just the viciousness. And it is very easy to judge until you step back and go, this is not, you are not going to look at this from the lens of, I am here and I would never raid a town. I can't imagine what it feels like to consider that feeling, that decision, that anger, to raid villages, to burn houses, to burn people within their houses. But here we see it less like a question of could you or would you, and more of the objective, this is what has happened. This is the history of these people. And it's the people specifically. And the heritage that they create around themselves that shows the importance of the greater world that we're shown. You know, it's easy to see monuments and wider shots and kind of conclude, oh, this is what this looks like. This is what this looks like. But it's the people who live within these worlds that change less, like most of the narrative. It strengthens it. And in Sinners, the greatest person I think to show the importance of really strong storytelling is Delta Slim. I think when we look at Delta Slim, a lot of people have been saying, he reminds me of an uncle, he reminds me of a grandfather, and a grandfather that most likely went through a really intense level of, struggle. But here, Delta Slim feels like a past world that shows up like a warning to black musicians, to black artists, and to black men that the world that they live in does not truly show up in comfort. It comes in with a brutal reality. One of those brutal realities that he shares is alcoholism. We we lose the reality and the stories that alcohol was a crippling chain on black and brown communities because of how it was used. Alcohol, there is a big reason why people petition against liquor stores being built in their communities. There's a big reason why you find entire, groups of people where alcoholism just devastates families, especially, and you'd find where history shares that some slaves, some people under oppression, people who worked under white people or white masters were paid with alcohol. And that addiction is a crippling thing to have to work with and accept as a musician and as a person. To know that it is this substance that I know gives me no growth, but it is what I'm given, and it is all I'm given. And Delta Slim shares that and explains that the music might have been great enough to get a white man's praise, but it did not get him the economic success and the social success that he needed in order to be, dare I say, human, to be respectable, to be taken as and taken as is. And he shares that he drank his money. And it's so hard to have to admit that, but he drank his money. And that is a common thing, to drink your money, to smoke your money, to sniff your money, to blow it. And now he still lives with alcoholism. It doesn't go away once you're broke. It just gets harder to maintain. And more to this warning is the heartbreaking reality of what it means to maybe by chance find economic success, the threat of what it does and what it means on a black person, black skin, which is a greater disbelief by the society they were around. And in the heartbreaking case of his like bandmate and friend in the story is lynchings. The idea that any black man with money would not be able to carry that and it must be a stolen thing changes changes what success even looks like when it becomes a thing that can get you threats and death. And it's hard. It's a very harsh and very intense scene, but it's one that you watch and it allows you to understand what it means to live on a plantation or live under these laws, under Jim Crow laws, under like these super oppressive laws. And these types of stories from people who you don't expect these stories to come from are what make like these worlds. And in the Northman, in Amleth's life, we understand a greater hardship that at first we must struggle to accept, you know. We don't like to admit what her choices were, but Gudrun, who is Amleth's mother, she when we hear her confession to Amleth, when she finds out that that is her son, and she shares that she planned the killing of his father and him, there is this automatic response to go, "You cruel, awful woman. How could you? That is your son. That is the love of your life. That is the king. What you done is treason." There is this instinct to just want to say that. But as she continues sharing her true relationship with the king, we hear that she was not a free woman, as free as a woman could be then, but she was not a princess. She was a slave. And not only was a slave, she was a slave, but she was a slave he fell in love with. A thing of a favoritism by a cruel person. You can almost say just licking love off a knife at this point. And he takes her and he marries her, and as she says, she gets and conceives a child by rape, and that child becomes Amleth, who is made a prince. And you almost ask yourself, what must this feel like to know that as you stand in front of all these people, they look at you and recognize not the slave that is captured under silk and, you know, wolfskin, but you are a slave that is a queen, and that this this power truly does not make you any freer than you were before it. And when she shows the branding that is on her skin, the one Amleth put on himself, she had no choice. We watch him and he puts it, and he lets it be a decision to pass. But with for her, it is on her as a reminder that there is nothing that will remove this from being there. It is on her skin, it is on her person. And even as a queen, she still bears this mark. And suddenly, Amleth trying to save her after this intense confession feels like a fantasy has been removed from us. He's no longer this man coming to save his mother and avenge his father. Instead, we see a woman who has decided that blood on her hands is greater than this gilded cage that she's in. And it's hard. It's hard to understand that she what she done, the idea of trying to kill her son and killing her husband, maybe it was her trying to, you know, free herself. But it is her reality, and it is not only her reality, it is a reality of that space that so much, you know, like lack of free will can exist even with such like space and such title. And it is not just the idea of, you know, this great monarchy that builds the cultural significance of these movies, but we also see it in the way that they go about religious and spiritual connections. Sorry. We see them, especially in Kugler's movie, we see this hoodoo and voodoo inspired use of spiritual and practitioner type magic and religion come to through Annie. We see her use this Yoruba religious religion of Ifa, and it is it is very clear the moment we are introduced to Annie that she holds great respect for what she prays for to and about. There is great intention in how she goes about her spiritual practices. She does not let it be something that she can be shaken on. And the importance of that in such an environment where you have nothing to keep your something, and it being a deeply African, deeply religious, deeply spiritual binding of like spirituality and practice is so important for the story. And more than that, we see the importance of how it is for her words to be shared, to be told, to be taken by the people around her. And even whether they believe her or not, we see that where there is disbelief, her disbelief doesn't shake. Like Smoke believe doesn't really believe in the practice in itself, but he holds he holds her belief of it close enough that it's what he will hold close to him and what he will allow to protect him. And most of all, in the movie, she doesn't show up like this fortune teller or a divine woman that is, taking all this ancestral work. Instead, we see practical spirituality used with the herbs and the stones and the minerals and and the waters, what she uses, the garlic, the she makes use of earth itself and the nature itself and the strength of that, and works that and binds it in protection. And when we see it work in the scene, like in the scene where the brothers are fighting, it it it, it changes a space of disbelief, because you ask yourself, how much do I believe that to be possible, even in the greater, uh magic that is the vampire of it all. Do we believe in spirituality and her power of protection enough that this evil that demands to take a body, can be pushed away and can be prevented, and change can come? So all of that, we see how important it is to bring significance to um this practitionership, and less so God. And I mean that so like umbrella term, but more so the people around us. How are they connected to this greater power? And how do they then share this greater power with those who just cannot reach? And in Edgar's Grand Tale, we witness Amleth's spirituality through the jester and spiritual guides that are shown to him or he cross paths with or finds throughout his journey. Um, Amleth and his father go to one of these jesters, and he's given a very intense spiritual moment. He's given a very intense, they take some substances and they they go into a trance. It's very ritualistic. It is very bound for the purpose of finding a greater channel, and that is quite scary, but it's also quite intimate to shoot. It's very, it's very jarring to have to watch and say, I understand why they're on all fours, why they're finding this darker, more, animalistic side to them, less so a peaceful side. But here we must then understand that in the Northman, the structures of role and what women and men do are so ingrained that when we watch Amleth and his father bear themselves as these wolves, we watch them embrace a space where men's desire for war almost changes or almost compares to a woman's concept of maternity. This and especially in this world where they've decided that these aspects must be ingrained into the men and ingrained into them in a way that would allow them to channel the viciousness of these animals that they're trying to claim as part of them and as being something that they can use. And just even having to bring that out of yourself and having to find such people who can help bring that power out is a very difficult thing. But as I ramble on about these two movies, which are so different, there I go again asking myself, what is the critical acclaim that must be asked, or that is being asked of, when we watch these movies, when we compare what these movies have created and what they have done? We know that Sinners broke the concept, the mold, the standard in terms of a movie, because it is everywhere on phones, screens, TVs, laptops, IMAX, the cinema. The movie is everywhere. It's a cultural phenomenon. And the thing is, the same can't be said for the Northmen. The Northmen pushed with all of this, pushed with their cinematography, their story, their cultural reality, and their significance. And in that, they they did not gain the acclaim that they were trying to get. And so I can only wonder, are we are we all holding breath, or is it just me maybe who's holding breath for the idea that 60 nominations later Sinners can go home empty? Or am I just being far too cynical about what critiques by the Golden Globes and the Oscars and the Emmys, what they mean to what is objectively a great cultural and culturally significant space? But yeah, that is my 2 cents, and maybe it's a little more than a 2 cents. But I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.